Back in the day, a flagman on the railroad would use a lantern with a red bandana wrapped around it to signal danger at night. One night, I was running a coal train to a plant in Louisiana when I noticed a dull red light hovering above the tracks about a mile and a half ahead of me. Knowing all the railroad history and knowing red means danger, I begin slowing the train so I can stop to see what is wrong. As I get closer, I can begin to make out a pale white man in a dirty, sweat-stained shirt with oily overalls on. He's wearing a cap that looks like it dates back to the late 1800s to the early 1900s. As the train slows down, he lifts his lantern, waves his arm free in a slow motion back and forth as signaling me to stop. I keep visual of this man to the point I'm within 100 yards of him, but I'm still moving slightly too fast to stop where he's at, and I know I'll pass it by a few hundred feet. At 50 yards, the man steps to the center of the track and stands there staring at me. I'm now doing all I can, trying to get the train to stop immediately, but it's not a Honda Civic, and it's acting as such. The train moves closer and closer. 40 yards, 30 yards, 20 yards, 10, 5. The man disappears over the nose of the train. My conductor and I are now panicking, thinking we've hit the man. When the train finally stops, the conductor rushes to find the man under the train. What felt like eternity. I'm phoning dispatch, but when my conductor radios, "Jack, there isn't anyone under the train. There isn't even a sign anyone was here." I ask dispatch if the track is out ahead. He tells me he's checking on that to hold tight. A moment later, and he says, "Yes, an 18-wheeler is hung up on the track. Did you not see a red light at the signal?" I reply, "No, the light must be out." I radioed my conductor, asking him to look for a signal. He radios me immediately. "Lights out." I relay the message to dispatch, and he says he will send someone to fix it immediately. In the meantime, just hold tight and he will call when it's clear to run. I tell my conductor what dispatch says. We both sit in confusion as to what just happened. This man just stopped us from hitting a vehicle, yet he wasn't really there. It was the freakiest thing I've ever experienced. First of all, I want to say sorry for my English. It's not my mother language. Now, to the story. Me, I'm 19 years old, and my younger sister, who's 13 years old, always wanted to try the Ouija board. After we read all the stories and watched the movies, we didn't really believe that someone or something could communicate with us through the board. We tried it a few times, and every time someone tried to talk to us. We made our own Ouija board out of cardboard, tinted our windows, lighted candles, and started a session. We put our hands on the glass, asked if someone was there. The glass was starting to move slowly, and we both looked up at each other, started to ask if one of us did it. We even picked up our hands a few times to make sure it was not us. So, the glass went on the yes. I started asking questions, and it answered. He said that he is a guy, and he's a bad ghost who wants to hurt us. Then the glass moved on the letters and started writing, H-A, H-A. I was surprised and asked if he's making fun of us. He answered yes. Then he started to spell words. I need help. We asked what kind of help he needs. It was creepy and I could feel my hand burning and my sister's fingers were hurting, but we tried to stay calm. He continued to talk. I want to go to Mom. We looked at each other in fear and confusion. I didn't know what to do. I asked if his mom was dead and he answered no. We didn't know if he was making fun of us or if he was lying. Why would he say that he is a bad ghost if he needed help? We decided to end the game, but we wanted to end it, and he kept moving the glass to no. We ended it anyway, with a weird feeling and headache. Next time, we almost forgot about that. We watched TV, and when suddenly we heard a loud growl, like it came from down the hall. It was scary, and after we checked the house, no one was there. When we got back to our room, we heard it again, but now it was longer and continued with voices. It was so scary, like thousands of people were talking and yelling. After this experience, we burned our Ouija board, and we'll never try it again. I'm 27 years old, male, live in the UK with my fiance, and currently working as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special educational needs in a school not far from Bradgate Park. I have worked in a number of schools and children's homes now. In these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old, renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened in 2013 when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teens and young adults, 18 to 30 years old, with autism, brain damage, and challenging behavior. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a game room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house and activity room that led on to acres of fields and woodland. I had been working there for about 3 weeks and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure all of the residents were settled for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over. I would usually get all of my jobs done for around 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening out for anyone that woke up. I would watch TV, read my university course books, or sometimes just play games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. On one particular night, a young man named James was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he did have a lot of strength behind him when he got into one of his bad moods, and the slightest thing could set him off. He once threw a member of staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words, put together in a way that he understood. For example, he would say something like, "James, make breakfast," when he was ready to make breakfast, or "James, go outside," if he wanted to go outside and play. He was generally well behaved and could be quite funny when he wanted to be, but was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself. And he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on top of the step and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so to make sure he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled in and went back to my cleaning, the room beneath James's bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofas, books, stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm and his eyes looked almost half shut, like he had been asleep. I asked if he was okay and he said yes and put his thumbs up. This was something he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out, so I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had knocked something over. An hour or so passed by. Now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, again like something had been dropped. This time I realized that the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up to house 5 residents, but there were only currently 4, and the room above me was the spare, empty room. I immediately went to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Due to the nature of their conditions and behaviors, each resident has an alarm fitted to their door that is activated at night, so if anyone leaves their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carry around makes a noise and a light blinks for a few seconds to indicate which door had been opened, numbered 1 through 5. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I got back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell that something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me a rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated and kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl," when asked what was wrong. This was something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie that stuck in his head and made him repeat this phrase. Once James had settled into bed, the night staff left, and the other member of staff that was sleeping in went up to the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks, and as usual finished around 1 a.m. Soon after this, I went upstairs to do a quick check on all of the residents, but as I got onto the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were two small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and right-hand sides of the staircase. James's room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside his room. I turned the corner to flip the switch, and there, in the darkness, in complete silence, was James. He was stood in the corner completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. I'm a big guy, 6'3" and weigh about 220. But at that moment, I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James and asked what was going on, and for a while he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the light back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself around the face. The sleep-in staff woke up at this point and helped me to calm the situation and get James back into bed before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off, and I was relieved that this incident had happened just as my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James talking about the little girl had gotten a lot worse. He would spend hours staring out of the window that overlooked the garden, saying, "Little girl, where are you, little girl?" And no one knew where he had heard the phrase. That night around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door to room 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now this instantly seemed a little bit weird to me, as because it was being used for storage at the time. I went up to investigate and found James stood in the room in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me enter and was just standing there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's go back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. But then as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door had been opened. The only people with the key to the front door were myself and the house manager. The door has 4 locks on it, 2 that require a key and 2 that require electronic ID cards. It was now 3:25 a.m. and the manager never came in before 8, so I presumed that there must have been some kind of mistake, and continued to defuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back into his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case someone had got in. I then checked on each side of the residence to make sure they were still in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm until around 2 a.m. when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that someone was tapping on his window. I guess that he must have just been dreaming, as his window was on the 3rd floor and the house was at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room with him to reassure him and checked his window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that had prevented it from opening wide enough for someone to fit through was still sealed. As he got back in bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside of his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who it was, but no one was there. He was clearly scared by this and said, "Is he back?" My blood ran cold and I asked, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked over my shoulder and then sank down into his bed, pulling the duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but there was still no one there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that there was no one there and left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January and around -2 outside, but I felt like I had to get out of the house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked, secured drawer where all of the sharp knives are kept until needed. The drawer was open slightly. This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed to access the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that there was one missing, so I woke the sleep-in staff, told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found this missing knife, so decided to just keep our guard up and make sure none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room again. I went up to check it out and found that the door was locked. How could the alarm have been activated by the door opening if the door was still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I often think about this incident. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was against the wall. The wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part? In the middle of the room, there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and a missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-styled baby doll. My guess was that it was made in the 50s, from the style of clothes and the overall look of the doll. The bracelet was simple but old-looking. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that the bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop soon after, along with the doll. After the doll and the bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down and never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened, and sometimes think that it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic boy, and the fact that the house was old. But on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and the bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Maybe it was paranormal, who knows. But now I work day shifts and do not plan on working night shifts again anytime soon. In 1992, I rented a house in Fredericksburg, Virginia, following several years of living abroad. It was a rather pleasant house, a ranch design, and an older neighborhood. There were many large trees that gave shade in the summer, and a wooded area behind the house, along with friendly neighbors and a genuinely placid calm overall. It was a nice place to live. There was not a hint that this house was haunted by an active, though unhappy ghost. As ghost implies, a frightening specter in my mind, I think I prefer the term spirit. The house haunting was confirmed to be human. The haunted did not begin immediately. Months passed, perhaps a year. It began unannounced. There was no warning of any kind, nor even a hint of warning from the landlord. On what I recall as a very lovely late summer day, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our front entry door opened with a bang, and the loud chatter of swinging Venetian blinds. My wife and son were with me in our family room watching television. Our daughter was serving in the military and was far off and unexpected. Our heads snapped sharply as we quickly looked at each other's faces, looking for a hint of understanding regarding of what was happening. There was none. Two probabilities scanned to mind. The first being my daughter home on unexpected leave, with the intent of surprising us. The second was criminal home invasion. After a moment spent gathering my wits, I moved from the family room to the living room, found our entry door wide open, the blinds which covered its window still swaying side to side. The door, for those prone to detail, opened inward. There was no apparent explanation for what had happened. That door was little used by our family and was kept locked. The door was rather difficult to open, as the door itself was simply stuck in the frame. It took a lot of effort to open, and when the door finally did, it popped free rather heavily, as a result of being stuck or jammed, in the force it took to open it. The metal Venetian blinds would swing and sway and clatter. In all, annoying enough that our front door was almost never used. After that first experience, things changed. The front door continued to open, although not frequently. The back door would also be found open from time to time. Bedroom doors opened much more frequently, though, and one bedroom in particular. As we were never in fear, and there was no show of hostility, we accepted our new reality. There may also have been an occasional noise during the night, but nothing of real note. We simply adopted whoever this was and often spoke to them. We had simple greetings or conversation. This came to an end for us in 1998 when it was time to return to my work abroad. Movers came to take away our belongings. While this went on, the lady living next door spoke to me over the fence and asked if anything unusual happened during our stay. I affirmed that it had. Then she told me the following. A woman and her daughter lives in that house that in the years past. The girl, a high school student, was 16 or 17 years of age. On New Year's Eve, the girl went to attend a party. The mother declined because of severe ice storms. The girl went anyway. The mother waited up to early hours for her daughter to return before crying herself to sleep. The mother was awakened by crying and discovered her daughter sitting in the chair next to her bed. The girl sobbed, "Oh, mother, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." The girl repeated her statement and then vanished. After 3 days of searching, the girl's car was located upside down in a canal, used by a local power company to produce electricity. The girl's body was in the car, which had slid off the icy road into the frozen canal. The woman who told me this was the sister of the girl's mother, making her the aunt of the girl. They had lived side by side as neighbors as well as relatives. I recall all of this with great clarity. This is a true and accurate presentation of what I had experienced. Over a decade ago, my best friend told my sister and I a story. We were all in college and she was living at her parents' for a while. They live not too far outside the city, but it's a hilly farmland, so most of the houses are pretty far apart. A family friend lived in a house across the field from them. This is what she told us. Her friend cut across the field the other night to come over. It was a clear night and a bright moon. All of a sudden, a huge shadow flew overhead, completely covering the light from the moon, so he claimed. The shadow flew straight to my best friend's house. Shaken, he continued on and once at the house, told my friend and her family what he had seen. That night, or a couple of nights later, my best friend saw a dark, three-dimensional blob hanging from her ceiling. It was darker than any shadow in the room. It hung down like a half circle or a raindrop. She saw it every night. When a light was on, there was nothing. She spent days moving things around in her room and outside her room, but that shadowy blob remained there. It didn't scare her, but she felt it was watching her. She was just started sleeping with her bedside lamp on to try to help her feel better. My sister and I thought it was a weird story, but, whatever. About 2 years later, I had completely forgotten about my friend's story. I was home alone from college for summer and had to stay in my brother's old room. Things were fine for a week or two, but one night, as I was falling asleep, I saw a three-dimensional blob sticking out from the seam where the wall meets the ceiling. It was darker than any other shadow in the room, and I had the strangest sensation that it was looking at me. I was very irked, but not afraid. I moved things around inside the room and out over the next few days, but always it was in the same place. I started sleeping with the bedside light on, and I would turn it off for a while to let my eyes adjust to each night to see if it was still there, and it was. Then after about 2 to 3 weeks, when I saw it, I found it had moved up toward me, still along the seam, about 3 feet. After that, I just kept this sort of light on. I was in and out of my room for several years, and I had never had a light off. I finished school and moved here and there, and any time I ever had to stay in that room, there's some kind of light on. I did check again, though, and every now and then, over the past 5 odd years, I haven't seen it since. I never saw it in any other room or place that I lived. Final notes. The shadow the friend certainly saw could have been an owl, but he wasn't sure. But who really knows? My friend and I gave a cute name after I remembered her story and I told her I saw the same thing. Again, we got the impression that it was just curious and looking at us, but not up to anything sinister. I'm not a believer in shadow people or creatures, but honestly, I don't know how else to describe this blob. I had this supervisor, Kate. One day, we had a discussion that turns into the unexplained, and she told me about something that happened when she was a teenager. She tries to debunk crazy things that have happened, but this is one she hasn't been able to do. It was the summer after she graduated from high school, sometime in the second half of the 1990s. She was 18 at the time. Her friend Billy was a few years older, but still lived with his mother. This was in a small town in western Maryland, and Billy's house had just enough land that he could throw raging, day-to-night summer parties complete with bonfires. At the same time, they weren't totally isolated, and random people from the surrounding neighborhoods would show up at his parties all the time. One day, Billy met this skater kid named Nick at one park one morning, and being a social animal guy, Billy invited him to hang out with him at his house. Billy probably also took some pity on Nick because Nick told him he was a runaway who was living at the park. They would basically play video games, go on rides, and party till late at night. Nick started showing up every day at Billy's house, knocking on the door at 7 a.m. sharp and engaging him in the morning until midnight drinking. He was about 16, with dark eyes and dark spiky hair. Remember, this was the late 90s. He seemed fairly normal, and everything except for a couple of things, that is. The first was that he was always wearing the same thing, a plain t-shirt and a pair of camo print cargo shorts. Despite the fact that he was sleeping at a park, his clothes always looked clean. The second is that he was never seen eating or going to the bathroom, despite the fact that Nick was drinking heavily with Billy. Finally, oddly enough, no one remembers actually feeling Nick's skin. Even my supervisor, who had sat next to him in a car during a road trip. She hung out with Billy and Nick at Billy's house 2 times, and each time, she and her friend felt like something was very off with Nick, especially when he would give off this laugh that just sounded very evil and maniacal. He also seemed to get kookier and weirder when they went on a road trip and the further they got away from Billy's city. Nick would also never shut up about his father's gun collection. Finally, Billy's hospitality reached its limits. After 2 weeks of waking Billy up at 7 a.m. to go party, Billy snapped at Nick. He said, "Look, Nick, you've been coming here every morning for 2 weeks. You're waking up my mother, who's trying to sleep. You really need to go now. Please just come back later." Then he slammed the door shut, and Nick never showed up again. Billy came to Katie a little bit later with a newspaper article. It was about Nick, who had apparently killed himself. Nick had escaped the mental asylum his parents had put him in that was located in Billy's town. He got to his father's house and shot himself with his father's gun. Billy was originally upset because he felt he must have put Nick over the edge when he kicked him out, until he checked the dates. Nick had committed suicide on July 10th, 2 weeks before they had even met. My husband and I had been married not even a year. We lived in an apartment that was upstairs in the back of the complex. The only thing in the back of us was an empty field, and then some commercial buildings. My husband was in the military and he had to go out on maneuvers for a month. It was in the middle of the night, sometime after midnight, and I got woken up to a bright light in the hallway, and my cat tearing down the hallway and slamming himself into the glass sliding doors to the balcony, hissing and scratching and clawing. He would then back up to the end of the hall, growling and hissing, and run and slam himself against the doors again. The curtains were drawn, and I could not see anything except this bright, incredible white light. It was lighting up my apartment, almost like a light was on. I didn't dare to go out there, because whatever it was did not make a sound. I kept thinking it was a helicopter. I would have heard the blades or something though, and if there was police down there I would have definitely seen or heard an engine of some kind. A couple weeks later, I was talking to my neighbor, and she oddly apologized. I told her what happened that night, and she said she was sorry, that she was one of these people that were getting frequently abducted, apparently. She had several pregnancies with babies that would just disappear after they were documented inside of her. I have no explanation as to what that was out on my patio, and I had no reason to doubt her, as she had never lied to me before, and I could tell by looking at her face that this was scaring the shit out of her, and she truly did feel sorry, and like she totally actually believed that she was being abducted. She told me not to worry as they were not coming after me, they were after her,